Stripers are still in the system, but the bass bite has really taken off, so largemouth bass are going to take center stage this week. Before we get into the report, let's check out a few pictures and we'll tell you what it's all about. Thanks for joining me. This is the In Deep on the Delta weekly fishing report, and it's the report for September 12th. We'll do a little river business, then we'll get right into the report. This Saturday, September 14th, Family Day on the Delta. It's a family fun day out at Holland Riverside Marina. It's sponsored by Crappie Closet Baits and Lunker's Tournament of Anglers. They're going to have some booths out there. They're going to have food. There will be a couple tournaments for the weigh-in if you guys want. If you've never been to a weigh-in, you can come in and watch a panfish weigh-in and actually a bass weigh-in. But they're going to have some booths out there for the kids. Plenty of things to do, some activities. That is September 14th out at Holland Riverside Marina. If you want more information, contact Marlon at 510-691-0586, or you can contact Steve. Steve is at steve@lta.fishing, and they can answer any questions for you. Hopefully I'll see you guys out there. I'm going to bring the grandkids out and see what's going on, so if you see me out there, stop and say hi. I'd love to chat with you guys. That is Family Fun Day, September 14th out at Holland Riverside Marina. Next up, we have an entry-level kayak tournament circuit that's going to be happening. This is the HBXL Outdoors Tournament Circuit. The first tournament is September 21st. And remember, this is an entry-level tournament for you guys that are just getting into kayak fishing, fishing your first tournament. This is a great tournament to start with. A $40 entry fee, and if you want to get in on a big fish pull, that's $20. It's a 95% payout, so you're going to get some money if you win, and I think Chris is probably going to have some plaques or some trophies. So if you have any questions, contact Chris Starkey at 209-430-6593. And that is, again, the HBXL Outdoors Entry-Level Kayak Tournament, September 21st. Let's get into the report. We'll talk about stripers. I have stayed in the Central Delta. I've seen a lot of striper activity on the main channel, basically between, we'll go from Prisoner's Point to Lads, especially early in the morning, a lot of bird activity. Follow those birds. You'll probably find some busting fish. By about 7 in the morning, that bite kind of dies off. Then you're going to want to go into the sloughs to catch your fish. They seem to be spread out all over. I did talk to Rob Cloutier. He has reported that the fishermen fishing, out of Russo's in that area, at least the bass fishermen have talked a little bit about maybe a slowdown right in the Franks Track area. I know there's a ton of fish in Whiskey Slough. I've been seeing a lot of bank anglers out there. Talked to a lot of them. They're all catching fish. I'm catching a lot of fish just fishing for largemouth, and I think that's where most of my reports came for stripers this week. Not necessarily striper guys that are targeting them, but the bass fishermen that are out there that are catching them. And they're not catching big fish. A lot of schoolie-sized fish, up to maybe 20, 21 inches. A lot of undersized fish, providing a lot of action, but the bigger fish just don't seem to be in the San Joaquin. Take your choice on what you want to do out here. You probably get a little bigger fish if you're fly lining live bait, but topwaters are working well, jerk baits are working well, crankbaits, pick your poison. You're probably going to get some small stripers out here. I have had some friends that have been out at Liberty. They also reported in the last week or so they had been doing really well, but the last few days since this tidal coefficient has really dropped down, the striper fishing has taken a little bit of a dip. That's out at Liberty. I know Fish King has been out there. He was out a couple days ago. He got a couple keepers, but he was getting 7, 8, 9, 10 keepers, you know, a week ago until that coefficient dropped down. I do know that there's still a ton of stripers out in the bay, and they're still coming in from Pittsburgh. The guys that are fishing around Pittsburgh and the Sacramento River, the trollers, they're still doing really well. And, you know, the fish are there. It's just that in the central delta here, where most of us are going out of, it's been a little bit of a dip. Let's talk about largemouth bass, and we'll start off with the Bass Hole Tournament that was held on September 8th. That was last Saturday. That was out at Russo's. And there's some things to be learned about this tournament compared to the last Bass Hole Tournament. Let's go over the winners and the weights that came in for winning weights. Logan and Jim Hunt's, they had 22 pounds basically to win the high rollers. The low rollers, Don and Drake Langen, had 23 pounds to win the low rollers, and they had a big fish of 7-8. I believe there was about 55 boats, somewhere right around there. The difference between 2 weeks ago and this week, the tournament 2 weeks ago, the guys at the top had very similar weights, but after you got down about, you know, to the top third, the bottom 2/3 had a very difficult time putting 5 fish in the boat. A lot of guys didn't weigh in. A lot of guys that did weigh in had 1 or 2 or 3 fish, maybe 5 or 6 pounds. The tournament last week, literally, I know everybody didn't have, I wasn't at the tournament this week. I had some prior business, but according to Rob, literally everyone except for a few guys weighed in a 5 fish limit. So lots of fish came in. Everybody had good action. They did have a 7-8 come in. There was a lot of good sized fish. The top weights were about the same, but the field just had much better fishing. And that's what I've seen through my reports this week. Everybody's catching fish. A lot of guys aren't catching big fish. And before I get into more of these bass reports, I'm going to give you one of my ideas of why more people are catching more fish in these lower tidal coefficients. Now, you guys know that the delta tides are super important. Last week when we had higher tidal coefficients in the 70s, 80s, as that tide starts to move, the fish start to bite, and then the tide really gets going. As that tide gets going really strong, the fish basically kind of pull off of that bite. So the first couple hours of that bite, of that changing tide at a higher tidal coefficient, could be pretty good fishing, but the bite windows are short, sometimes 15, 20 minutes, and that's all you got. As these tidal coefficients drop down and we don't have as much water movement, this week we've had tidal coefficients in the 40s and 50s, generally not great for largemouth bass. But what happens as during those, when that tide starts to change, it doesn't change as fast. So we have longer bite windows, and I think that's why a lot of people are catching more fish. Instead of having a 15 or 20 minute bite window when the tide is changing, I've experienced an hour to an hour and a half bite window. It doesn't matter if it's high outgoing or low incoming tide, just that first couple of hours, it's not that all of a sudden abrupt change where water starts moving, everything starts feeding at a 10. It's a slow burn, and maybe the fish aren't on at that level 10 bite, but they're on a level of 6 or 7. But the good thing is we've had a longer bite window that lasts an hour and a half. It gives everybody a little more chance to move around and maybe find that bite window. So if you're not in the right place at the right time, you're still catching fish. Here's the deal for the last week: persistence. Number one, that if you're not out there, you know, fishing 5, 6, 7, or 8 hours, it's tough to find those bite windows. I know I go out for a half a day sometimes, and I get blanked, and I've got a partner that, you know, goes out in the afternoon and he just kills them. I miss the bite window. So think about that, and think about being more persistent, putting more hours in to make sure you're on the water during that change of tide that the bite window is going to happen. Man, I just said a lot right there. So another pattern that I am seeing, especially for me, is my bigger fish, and I've done really well on solid fish up to about 5.5, 6 pounds this week, and a lot of just solid 3 to 4 pound fish, and fewer rats. I'd say 99% of my big fish are coming on the outside of vegetation. I'm fishing islands and primarily a lot of island points, but I'm not getting the fish up in close. I'm getting them off in about 5 to 8 feet of water, and I'm fishing offshore where it drops off into the channel. That's where I've been getting my big fish. Now, my topwater bites in the morning have not been great, but there are a lot of people that are catching topwater fish, so my suggestion is if you can get out and fish between 6 and 7, you'll probably get a topwater bite. I talked to Coach Ted this morning, and this is Wednesday, as of 7 o'clock this morning, Ted already had 5 fish in the boat, and I've got a picture of one of them. He's getting some good fish. So there is a early morning and late bite topwater bite going on. After that, I would go out offshore to the edge of the vegetation and fish out there. My number one bait, without a doubt, is a jerk bait. And I know that's not a sexy thing to be fishing this time of year. I usually don't get big fish, but I'll tell you, this summer the jerk bait has pulled out a lot of big fish for me. I can only tell you, if you are out here and you're going to fish through the course of a day, maybe it's just not an evening fishery or a morning fishery, you want to get out and you want to keep a jerk bait on, and you want to fish in 5 to 8 feet of water and at least put some time in doing that. Doesn't matter the color, doesn't matter how fast you're moving it or how long you're pausing, depending on the bite window and what's in front of you and that given time. I've got a lot of fish where I was actually trying to catch a striper where I was just reeling in and I'm picking up bass. I've had to slow down at certain times where you twitch and just stop, and then that third twitch, when it comes again, the bass will hit it. But it doesn't matter how you're fishing that jerk bait, and it doesn't matter what brand. I've used a Stunna, I've used some off brands, and I've used the Mega Bass 110. They're hitting them all. Make it look like a bait fish. A little bit of chartreuse is something good that you might want to have on that jerk bait. But after that, it's more technique and just putting your nose to the grindstone. Also had some good bites on whopper ploppers or choppos, and that's another thing that has been happening. I know my buddy Pua just won a tournament out here, and I think I'm going to get Pua on the out to do an interview hopefully this week. He'll tell you guys, you kayak guys, how he caught a lot of his fish, and I know he was using a chopo, I believe, and he caught some really nice fish. He had close to 100 inches, which is, you know, a 20-pound bag, and that's Pua Yang. So you guys that know Pua, check in deep on the Delta for his interview coming up. One other thing, if you know, we talked about fishing jerk baits. Last week when I was out with Ted, Coach Ted, I think I showed this video where he hooked himself again in the finger. We ended up doing a video on how to remove hooks safely. If you haven't watched that, watch it, because as we get into winter, we're going to be throwing a lot more crankbaits and a lot more treble hook things, a lot more jerk baits, and your chances of getting a hook in your finger get a little higher. So if you haven't watched that, make sure you watch that with Coach Ted. And Ted is a medical professional, so this just isn't a couple of guys talking about, you know, how you jerk a hook out of your finger. He'll give you the rundown on how to do it safely. So check out that video. What else do I need to talk about here? Also, one thing that I've noticed out here, when we get these calm days where we have a wind that comes up, a wind that drops, wind that comes up, man, you want to be fishing hard when that wind comes up. You definitely want to have a topwater on as that wind picks up, like the chopo, and that's when I'll put down my jerkbait and go to a topwater. And I have been getting some nice fish on topwater bites when that wind is coming up. So with that, that's about all I got for you guys. The fish are out there and they're biting. It's been a lot of fun. You are going to wade through some rats, but just go out there, be persistent, keep a jerk bait on, If you don't like throwing a jerk bait, use a crankbait or a chatterbait. You'll also catch some fish. Keep top waters on and just go out and have some fun. The weather has been absolutely beautiful. If you get to go out on a weekday, there's hardly any pressure out here. The weekends have a little more pressure, but it's a really great time of year to be out here fishing. And I think in the next couple weeks, as this water temperature and weather kind of stabilizes into that 70s to 90s, we're not getting the 100-degree days anymore. We're going to continue to have a really kind of slow burn into winter. We're going to have some great fishing. So thank you guys for watching, and until next week, we'll see you guys on the water.